A Russian armored column can look unstoppable from a distance. Tanks in front. BMP-3 fighting vehicles behind. Artillery firing ahead to shake the ground before the assault begins. On paper, that kind of force is built to break a defensive line. But in South Donetsk, power means very little when the sky is already watching. Along the Vuhledar to Mariinka corridor, Russian forces tried to push forward after days of shelling, hoping to open a crack in Ukraine's defenses. What they did not know was that the road ahead was becoming more than a route. It was turning into a trap. Ukraine did not need to meet the assault head-on. It only needed patience, eyes above the battlefield, and the right weapons waiting in the right place. Before going deeper, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear analysis on the weapons, battles, and geopolitical shocks shaping today's war. So how did one Russian mechanized assault move from confidence into a deadly kill zone? Russia opened the assault with a familiar idea. Break the ground first, then send armor forward before Ukraine could recover. Along the Vuhledar to Mariinka corridor, Russian forces pushed a mechanized column built around BMP-3 fighting vehicles and T-72B3 tanks. This was not a random movement across the front. It looked like a planned attempt to test Ukraine's line in South Donetsk after several days of artillery pressure. The shelling was meant to weaken firing positions, cut communication between small defensive groups, and create the feeling that the front was ready to crack. Once that pressure seemed strong enough, the armored vehicles moved in to turn firepower into ground control. But the road they entered was not just a path toward the Ukrainian line. It was the first part of a much more dangerous battlefield. This corridor matters because South Donetsk is not an open chessboard where tanks can move freely in every direction. It is a battlefield shaped by roads, tree lines, small settlements, broken fields, and narrow routes that can trap heavy vehicles if the enemy is waiting. Around Vuhledar and Mariinka, even a small rise in the ground can change who sees first and who fires first. A village edge can hide an anti-tank team. A forest strip can cover a drone crew. A damaged road can slow a column long enough for artillery or guided weapons to arrive. That is why movement in this area is never just movement. It is a test of timing, observation, and nerve. For Russia, reaching the next position was only one problem. Surviving the route toward it was the harder one. Vuhledar had already shown how costly this kind of assault can become for Moscow. Earlier battles in the area turned Russian armored pushes into scenes of heavy losses, with vehicles hit by mines, artillery, drones, and anti-tank weapons before they could build real momentum. That history should have forced a different approach. Yet the new attack still followed the same basic logic. Russian commanders used strong shelling to pressure the line, then sent tanks and BMPs forward along a predictable axis, hoping speed and armor would create a breakthrough. On paper, that can sound simple. In the field, it creates a pattern that Ukraine can study, prepare for, and strike. The more Russia repeats the same shape of attack, the easier it becomes for Ukraine to read the next move before it fully begins. The T-72B3 and BMP-3 were supposed to give the assault weight. The tank brings a powerful gun, heavy armor, and shock value. The BMP carries infantry while adding cannon fire and mobility. Together, they are designed to push through weak defenses and keep pressure on retreating soldiers. But that only works when the column keeps coordination, spacing, and surprise. Once a route is watched by drones and covered by anti-tank teams, those strengths can turn into weaknesses. A tank in front may block the road if it is destroyed. A damaged BMP can force soldiers to dismount under fire. A column moving in line can lose control very quickly when the first vehicles are hit. That is where the battle began to shift from assault to exposure. The most important detail was not how strong the Russian column looked at the start. It was what Russia believed it was seeing. After days of shelling and limited Ukrainian movement near the forward positions, the battlefield may have looked softer than it truly was. To Russian troops, the gap ahead may have seemed like a sign that Ukraine was pulling back under pressure. But in modern war, silence can be a weapon. A quiet trench, an empty edge of a settlement, or a road with no immediate fire can invite an attacker deeper into danger. The space Russia saw was not proof that the defense had collapsed. It was the opening move of a trap waiting farther down the corridor. Ukraine's first move was not to stop the Russian column at the outer edge of the line. It was to let the assault believe it had found weakness. Instead of holding every forward position at any cost, Ukrainian troops left a tactical gap that looked useful to the attacker. After days of Russian shelling, that space could be read as a sign of pressure working. To a commander looking for a breakthrough, an empty trench line or a quiet position can look like the moment to push harder. But this was the danger. Ukraine was not giving up the battlefield. It was shaping where the fight would happen. Behind that space, the real defense was being prepared with more care. Bradley fighting vehicles were placed where they could fire into the side of the road, not just straight ahead. Javelin teams waited in positions with clean lines of sight because an anti-tank missile is most dangerous when the target has no time to turn or hide. Above them, reconnaissance drones watched the route and fed information back to the crews on the ground. Ukrainian infantry also held points that could block escape routes or hit dismounted soldiers if the vehicles were stopped. This was not one weapon waiting for one target. It was a layered ambush built around timing. The purpose of this design was to change the meaning of the Russian attack. What began as an attempted breakthrough slowly became a guided march into a prepared fire zone. The farther the armored group moved, the less freedom it had. A column on a road cannot react like separate small units. If the front vehicle slows down, everything behind it begins to compress. If one BMP turns too wide, it can expose its side. If a tank stops in the wrong place, it can block movement for the vehicles behind it. In this kind of terrain, speed is useful only until the enemy has already chosen where the road ends. The spacing problem was especially dangerous for Russia. Armored vehicles need distance between each other because one hit should not freeze the whole formation. But under pressure, crews often close the gap without meaning to. They follow the vehicle ahead, avoid soft ground, and stay on the most visible path because leaving the road can bring mines or mud. That makes the column easier to track from the air. It also gives Ukrainian crews a clearer order of targets. The lead tank matters. The infantry carriers matter. Any vehicle that looks like it holds officers, radios, or extra equipment becomes valuable. Once the pattern is seen, the ambush is no longer a guess. Reconnaissance drones were the eyes of this entire setup. They did more than spot movement. They helped Ukraine read the column in real time. From above, drone operators could see which vehicle was leading, where infantry might be sitting, where the convoy was slowing, and which section was becoming isolated. That information gave Javelin teams and Bradley crews more than a target. It gave them the right moment. In modern combat, a few seconds of good observation can decide whether an ambush destroys one vehicle or breaks the whole attack. By the time the Russian column entered the kill zone, Ukraine did not need to fire too early. A rushed shot might warn the rear vehicles and give them time to reverse. A patient defense is more dangerous because it waits until the attackers are deep enough to lose quick choices. The road behind them becomes crowded. The ground beside them becomes risky. The sky above them is no longer empty. And when every exit is already watched, the first Ukrainian strike can turn movement into panic. The ambush began when the Russian column had moved deep enough to lose its freedom of movement. Ukrainian crews did not fire as separate teams looking for single kills. They opened the trap as one connected strike. Javelin teams focused on the T-72B3 tanks because those vehicles carried the weight of the assault and gave the column its shock power. At the same time, Bradley fighting vehicles turned their 25mm Bushmaster cannons toward the BMP-3s and lighter armored targets. This split was important. Ukraine was not just shooting at whatever appeared first. It was assigning the right weapon to the right target, and that made the first moments of the attack much more dangerous. The Javelin was the weapon Russia had to fear most at the front of the column. It is built to attack armored targets from above or from a direct path, depending on the situation. Against a tank, the top attack mode is especially deadly because the roof armor is usually thinner than the front plate. A T-72B3 can look strong from the front, but it is far more vulnerable when a missile comes down from a high angle. Once the missile locks on and strikes the upper part of the vehicle, the crew has very little time to react. In a narrow assault route, that first hit can do more than destroy one tank. It can freeze the whole line behind it. The danger became even worse because of how many Russian tanks store ammunition inside the hull and around the crew area. When a penetrating hit reaches that space, the result can be catastrophic. The tank is not only damaged, it can explode from the inside as the ammunition cooks off. This is why many battlefield videos show Russian tanks losing their turrets after a direct internal blast. For the soldiers nearby, the effect is more than visual shock. It breaks confidence, blocks the road, and warns every crew behind that the same fate may be waiting a few meters ahead. At that moment, the assault begins to lose its shape. While the Javelins were hunting the tanks, the Bradleys worked the sides of the formation. This was where the BMP-3s became exposed. These vehicles are armed and mobile, but they are not built to absorb repeated hits from a fast-firing cannon at close or medium range. The 25mm Bushmaster does not need to destroy every target with one round. It can fire bursts into tracks, optics, side armor, engine areas, and weapon stations. A damaged track can stop a vehicle. A shattered sight can blind the gunner. A hit near the rear can force smoke, fire, or panic inside the troop compartment. That kind of pressure turns an infantry carrier into a trap for the men it was meant to protect. The real power of the Bradley in this moment was not only its cannon, it was the angle. Firing from the flank gave Ukrainian crews a better chance to hit weak points and break the column from the side instead of challenging it head-on. BMP-3s forced to stay on a narrow route had little room to turn, spread out, or find cover. If one vehicle stopped, the next had to slow. If soldiers jumped out, they entered open ground under drone observation and supporting fire. The formation that was supposed to deliver infantry into battle was now forcing those same troops into confusion. This is why the ambush was not just a fight between vehicles, it was an attack on Russian command rhythm. Once the lead tanks were hit and the BMP-3s were being cut apart, orders became harder to follow. Drivers had to decide whether to push forward, reverse, or abandon their machines. Infantry could no longer count on armored cover. Officers had fewer seconds to understand what was happening. A mechanized column depends on movement, timing, and control, but Ukraine struck all three at once. When the front vehicles burn and the carriers behind them lose direction, the assault no longer behaves like a spearhead. It becomes a broken line waiting for the next layer of attack. When the BMP-3s were damaged and the T-72B3s began to burn, the Russian soldiers who survived faced a new problem. Leaving the vehicle did not mean leaving danger. Many of them had to climb out without a clear formation around them, without enough smoke to hide their movement, and without a commander who could still control the scene. Some men likely ran toward tree lines. Others searched for holes, broken walls, or small folds in the ground. But the attack had already moved beyond armored combat, and the battlefield was now closing around the people who escaped the first strike. This is where reconnaissance UAVs became more dangerous than a normal observer. From above, Ukrainian drone teams could follow small groups as they left the wrecks and tried to survive. A soldier hiding near a roadside ditch could still be seen. A team moving toward an abandoned house could be marked. Even a short sprint across open ground could reveal direction, fear, and possible shelter. In older wars, dismounting from a burning vehicle could give troops a chance to regroup. In this war, the sky often keeps the fight alive long after the machine has stopped moving. Bomb-dropping drones then became the next layer of pressure. They did not need to destroy a tank or fight armor directly. Their targets were soldiers who had lost cover, spacing, and control. A small explosive dropped into a trench, beside a wall, or near a hiding place could force men to run again. That movement gave the UAV operators another chance to track them. The goal was not only to cause casualties, it was also to prevent the survivors from forming a defensive group, helping wounded troops, or returning to the vehicles. Once men are forced to keep moving under observation, they stop acting like a unit. The psychological effect also mattered. Russian crews had just seen tanks hit from above and infantry carriers torn apart from the flank. Then, after leaving the wreckage, they were still being watched. That creates a heavy kind of pressure because there is no safe stage in the retreat. The road is dangerous. The tree line may be marked. The shelter may be too small. The sky may already know where the next group is hiding. In that environment, fear spreads faster than orders, and every soldier begins to think more about survival than the mission. 1T-72. B-3 was reportedly abandoned almost intact after the crew saw several other vehicles destroyed in sequence. That detail matters because an untouched tank can become more valuable than a burned one. If Ukraine captures it, the vehicle may provide radios, navigation equipment, maintenance records, manuals, maps, or technical clues about Russian battlefield systems. Even small details can help intelligence teams understand how a unit communicates, how it moves, and what kind of equipment it carries into an assault. A lost tank is already expensive, but a captured one can also become a source of information. This is why the end of the ambush was just as important as the first strike. Ukraine was not only trying to remove Russian armor from the road, it was trying to break the human structure behind that armor. The damaged vehicles created panic, the drones kept survivors exposed, and the abandoned tank turned a battlefield loss into a possible intelligence gain. In a modern ambush, destruction is only one result. The deeper goal is to collapse will, shatter formation, and take useful knowledge from the system that the enemy leaves behind. The ambush along the Vuhledar to Marinka corridor shows a hard truth about modern mechanized war. Tanks and infantry fighting vehicles no longer decide the battle by themselves. A T-72. B-3 still has armor, a large gun, and battlefield weight. A BMP-3 can still move soldiers and support them with fire. But if these vehicles enter a zone where low-flying drones control the view from above, their old strengths begin to shrink. Armor can protect against some threats, but it cannot protect a column from being seen, tracked, and targeted before the first shot is fired. That is where this battle becomes larger than one failed assault. Ukraine created a full fire chain, and each layer had a different role. Reconnaissance UAVs found the movement and helped map the order of the column. Javelin teams were used against the tanks because those vehicles carried the main shock force of the attack. Bradley fighting vehicles focused on the BMP-3s and broke the armored carriers from the side. Bomb-dropping drones then followed the infantry after they left damaged vehicles. Ground troops helped secure the area once the assault lost its shape. This was not one weapon winning the fight. It was a system working faster than the Russian formation could react, and that speed made the trap deadly. This is the new killbox of mechanized warfare. The target is first detected, then pulled into a chosen space, then struck from more than one direction before it can reorganize. In older armored battles, surprise often came from hidden guns, minefields, or artillery fire. Those tools still matter, but drones have added a new layer that makes movement much harder to hide. A road is no longer just a route. It becomes a line that can be watched from start to finish. Once the column is marked, every vehicle becomes part of a larger target picture, and every delay gives the defender more time to finish the plan. For Russia, the lesson is heavy because the problem is not only about losing vehicles. The deeper issue is how those vehicles are used. A column with thick armor and heavy firepower can still collapse if it moves along a watched route without enough drone defense, electronic protection, and flexible command. If the lead vehicle is hit, the road can close. If the carriers stop, infantry may be forced into open ground. If commanders cannot read the ambush quickly, the whole assault can fall apart in minutes. That means future attacks will need more than courage and armor. They will need better scouting, faster decisions, and stronger control of the air just above the battlefield. The war is no longer only about which side has more tanks in storage or more vehicles at the front. It is becoming a contest between sensors, weapons, crews, and command systems moving at high speed. The side that sees first can choose the ground. The side that links information to firepower can break the attack before it becomes a breakthrough. And the side that adapts faster will shape the next phase of mechanized combat, where the conclusion is not written by steel alone, but by the network controlling it. This ambush shows why mechanized war in Ukraine is becoming faster, sharper, and much harder to survive. The fight along the Vuhledar to Mariinka corridor was not only about destroyed BMP-3s or burning T-72B3 tanks. It showed a larger change in the battlefield, where armor still matters, but information now decides how long that armor can stay alive. Russia entered the attack with a classic plan. Shell the line, move the tanks forward, send infantry carriers behind them, and force Ukraine to bend. Ukraine answered with a more modern method. Give ground with purpose, watch from above, wait for the column to enter the right space, then strike with javelin, Bradley fire, drones, and ground troops working together. The lesson is clear. A heavy vehicle can still be dangerous, but once it is seen first and trapped on a narrow route, it can become a target very quickly. More battles like this are likely because both sides now understand that the real race is between movement and detection. For more clear analysis on the weapons, battles, and geopolitical shocks shaping today's war, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Military Force.